two topics which every adult Australian has reviewed, and those two topics are poker machines and water. Poker machines are actually in the realm of the pollies and counters, so I won't worry about that. But we asked us today to discuss the more interesting topic with adult water. Now, I'm delighted to introduce Professor Mark Young to you, and he is the founding executive director of the University of Adelaide Environmental Institute, and he holds the research chair in water economics and management at the University of Adelaide. He will address us on certain aspects of this most wide-ranging subject. Further particulars of Professor Young's appointments and achievements are set out in the bulletin, and I recommend them for your reading. So without further ado, I'll now ask Mike Young to address you.
Thank you, Ivan. Thank you for the chance to be here to talk to you. Before I start talking about water, I wanted to take a few seconds to mention something which I've become very interested in. This is really the sustainability of buildings, but also of access to those buildings by disabled people. And recently I met Kelly Vincent, our actually Member of Parliament, who goes to Parliament every day in a wheelchair. And Parliament's had to rebuild a lot of Parliament so that she can get around and function. And she, Keith Trotman and I have been asked to be patron of a new organisation called I-Square, which simply asks business to register how accessible their buildings are so that disabled people can see whether or not they can get into your building, and also how sustainability it is. And there's a little twinkle in my heart that says that Rotary, even around Australia or possibly the world, might take up this and encourage each of the businesses you're associated with to register. And I'd be very interested to talk to people who would like to explore that further. So I think it's a really exciting, simple idea. It costs nothing and could make a huge difference to the lives of thousands of people. Water. Water's something which we all use every day in lots of different ways, and is critically important to the future of this nation. When I travel the world, I keep on being told by people how impressed they are by how well we're driving water reforms. I'm always shocked by that, because when I look at it, I think, how can we get it so badly wrong? And yet, talk the fundamentals, but get all the concepts right. When you look at the National Water Initiative, you look at all of the arrangements in place, it makes good sense. But we struggle to get the detail right. I think what we've done is we've taken all the low-hanging fruit, the easy bits, and done things like set up water markets and water trading, and done that brilliantly without addressing some of the more fundamentals, which have all been known for a long time. And I thought I'd spend a little bit of time today talking to you about the fundamentals that we got wrong. And I was asked today at lunchtime why I've been working in water and why did I start. The reason why was because I was sitting in Sydney actually in 1997 designing an emissions trading scheme for Australia. We was going to start off with a tax and do all these sorts of things. I suddenly realised that the government was totally uninterested in starting up such a scheme, and I was wasting my time. So on a half I said, I'm going off to do water. And so I went off and started doing water and became interested in it. The things that really stand out, one of the fundamentals mistakes we've made is we've forgotten to set up accounting regimes that work. Very, very basic fundamental arrangements. And the first of these, which is really important, particularly important as Parliament is about today to pass an emissions trading scheme of some sort, we'll get it through the first bit and then through the Senate, is that whenever you plant trees, trees use water. Where does most of our water come from? Most of our water comes from the very top of the Murray-Darling Basin catchment in areas that are steep and were cleared for grazing over a century ago. And because the trees were removed, water ran off, and we've built an irrigation industry that relies on all those areas being cleared. We're now about to pay farmers to plant that back to trees. When you plant that back to trees, the water no longer runs off. And what we haven't done is commit to a regime that says if we're going to plant these trees, who's going to give up their irrigation? The logical thing to do is to put in place a framework which says, yes, you'll get carbon credits for planting the trees, but you also have to go and buy water entitlements from somebody, or else we'll be back in trouble again. Already with the subsidies that have been put in place to try and start this industry up, we've lost 500 gigalitres of water roughly out of the Murray-Darling Basin. 500 just sounds like a lot of water. If all South Australian irrigators in the River Murray get their full entitlement, they get 500 gigalitres. So we've already taken out one South Australia out of the river. And if we go down the pathway, we'll probably take another one out. Go a little bit further down the river and into the irrigation areas, you find, particularly in some of the better areas of New South Wales and Victoria, there's really good quality groundwater. Those groundwater systems all flow into the river. The Murray-Darling River is largely what's called a gaining river. It gains water from groundwater. When we introduced water trading, irrigators said, oh, I could sell off some of my surface water and I could start using the groundwater. And they did. But guess where that groundwater used to go? It used to flow to the river. We forgot to reduce allocations as we developed the groundwater. Whoops. And then everybody started getting worried around about 2000 about the health of the River Murray, and I did a study on working out how much water would be needed then to fix the health of the River Murray. The answer was about 1,500 gigalitres at the time were needed to fix it. While this was going on, irrigators were being told they had to get more efficient. And they did. What I'd like to do is to show you what happens when you get more efficient. And for that I have to play with a couple of glasses and show you what happens. Imagine this is your dam full of water. And you have two irrigators who are each entitled to half a glass of water, and a river which is entitled to half a glass of water. Very simple. Here's your first irrigator. Here's your second irrigator, and if I can do it without dropping the river, here's the river. Fine. The way we actually started off the system, back in the 1990s, is we told the first irrigators they could have a full glass of water. That was fine because they used it inefficiently. And I used to live in Deniliquin. I used to play tennis every Saturday. The big problem was how to get all of the rice water down the drains and back into the river. There were all these drainage schemes in place because the system was inefficient. That was fine, and it meant that this irrigator actually only used half a glass of water and half drained back. So the next irrigator, who might be an irrigator in South Australia, got a full glass. He was happy, no problem. And the river was sitting there saying, where's all my water? It was okay because the South Australian irrigator was inefficient too. So the river got its half a glass and we all ended up. Great, no problem. It worked. So we introduced markets and we told the first irrigator to get efficient. I said, what does getting efficient mean? He said, I can use it all, yeah. I have to be really careful and use drip irrigation systems and laser level everything, get it all right, put in probes and sensors, all the state-of-the-art technology, which they did, and he used the full glass. Nothing went back. The next irrigator got furious and said, who's pinched all my water? Why have I now only got half a glass? You've always given me a full glass. So absolute fits of anger. He got really efficient too and used it all. And got really cross. We adopted everything. And in 2002, the River Murray stopped flowing. It stopped flowing because we got efficient. We've done what everybody told it to happen. But we've forgotten when people used water efficiently, they actually used twice as much water. 2002 was when the river stopped flowing, and I went and walked across the mouth of the Murray the week before they put 2 dredges in. I was really upset because I'd seen all this happening and the modelling had all predicted this was what was going to happen, and it did. Unfortunately, in a lot of ways, that was the start of the drought as well. In the years that followed, was drought after drought. So everybody thought the problem was the drought. It wasn't. The fact we put dredges in the mouth of the Murray before the drought illustrates in one simple way that we were in serious strife. We can go even further down, things like we put in salinity interception schemes that is put there to stop salty water from getting into the river. But we never worked out who was going to use less water. We put 70 gigalitres of salinity interception schemes in the Murray and forgot to put 70 gigalitres back from somewhere else. We just keep on making mistake after mistake in fundamental accounting. And so now we're in a situation where there's a debate going on about how much water we have to buy back and get back. The scientists are saying if you run the models they have access to, it's about 3,800, which in Korea is about twice as bad as it was 10 years ago. But that shouldn't surprise you because we haven't fixed up the problems and there's been massive investment. In fact, the rate of return, for those of you who understand profit, on holding a water entitlement has averaged about 18 or 19% internal rate of return year in, year out since we introduced water entitlements. Every about 5 years, the value of your water entitlement doubles. If you're sitting in the irrigation industry with an entitlement that used to be worth $100 and it's now worth $2,500, you've noticed your wealth going from being $100,000 or whatever up to being worth several million. You're not very impressed with a Murray-Darling Basin Authority that comes along and says, I want to take 30 or 40% of your water back. You get very cross. But what we've been doing is borrowing from our future and failing to understand water accounting basics, which is so fundamental to get things right. If that's not tough enough, I need to share with you one other thing which I think is equally important, and that's to understand what happens when the world gets drier. This is something which very few people understand. When you get less rainfall, on average, we go through some adverse climate change, then more rain gets spent just wetting up the soil. Rivers only run water off into rivers, or water only runs off into rivers after the soil is wet. So if it's dry for long, you don't get as much water. And for every about 1% reduction in mean rainfall, you get about 4% reduction in runoff. So if you get about a 10% reduction in rainfall, which doesn't sound like a lot, that means the amount of water that's available for use goes down by about half. Now think of this bottle when it was full. When it was full, the bottom about third is needed just to have a river. You're going to have a river that supplies water to Adelaide. Before you can get water into Adelaide, you have to have water at Manham and water at Taylor Bend and water at Murray Bridge. So the bottom bit of that is used just for having the river. Then if you want a bit for the environment, if you take that, say 2 fingers for the environment, not much, but a little bit, look after it. That means if you lose half of your water, the amount of water which is available for use goes down by about 70%. So a little drying, 10% drying means we're going to have to give up about 2/3 of our water use. We have to understand that as a nation and have to put in place regimes to contemplate the consequences of adverse climate change. And they're savage and frightening. Imagine the Murray-Darling Basin with 2/3 of its irrigation gone, simply because the water's not there. There's no way out of this. It's just basic physics. And it's critical to our future. In the short term, what are we doing about it? We're trying to put together a basin plan. Irrigators, particularly irrigators upstream, are saying South Australia just has to learn to cope without water. We can't have lower lakes, we can't have a Coorong. They want all their water up there. Of course they want it all up there because it's generated a lot of wealth for them and I'd like to have it. Moreover, we're putting a lot of money into fixing this up at the moment. $8.9 billion of taxpayers' money is being transferred to the irrigation industry for a solution. It's possibly justifiable if it's a real solution, it's robust and gets the basics right. It's not the right thing to do if we don't get it really right. Because $8.9 billion divided by the number of irrigators in the system is $588,000 an irrigator. It's over $500,000 an irrigator. Commonwealth is transferring from taxpayers' money, from consolidated revenue, over $500,000 to each irrigator. But half of the irrigators don't need to change what they do, so it's more like $1 million per irrigator that has to change. And yet, we as a nation are sitting down and contemplating only half fixing the problem. I don't think that's acceptable. We're going to spend this money, that much money. You would expect the Murray-Darling Basin to be managed in an outstanding way, getting all of the detail right, planning properly for climate change, getting connections between ground and surface water right, understanding when you become more efficient, you have to take less water. Understanding when you put in the salinity deception scheme, you've got to work out what to do. And when Parliament does things like it's doing today and introduces credits for people who plant trees, at the same time it makes sure they have to buy back the water so that we don't kill the river trying to save the world's climate. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Mike. Now, do we have any questions for him? Yes, John.
Sir, I drive through New South Wales and Victoria regularly, and there appears to be what are rivers. They're not rivers, they're big irrigation channels. Now, say you take 10 units of water, that's your entitlement. You take the 10 units out of that channel, but you get measured on what you take out. They don't talk about the 90% that dries up in the channel. Now, I understand Howard was providing money to the pipelines and the channels. They've done nothing. What's happening?
The allocations do account for the losses in the channel, and yes, it makes sense to put in place what are called total channel control systems. You have to be very careful putting water into pipes, particularly in a low carbon economy, or an economy that's transitioning to a low carbon. When you put it into pipes, you need a lot of energy. Gravity is free. Those irrigation systems function very, very efficiently as gravity-fed systems, and they're very low cost. Now that's important. In fact, I often start when I'm asked to address the grape industry here and the wine industry here in South Australia, I ask them all to thank the rice industry, because the rice industry is a low-cost business that's designed so it can switch itself off when there's not a lot of water around. If you look at what's happened in the last drought, the rice industry was switched off, and that enabled us to have our grapevines and our citrus trees in South Australia stay alive. If it was all citrus and all modern state-of-the-art expensive irrigation up in New South Wales and also in Victoria, we would have lost our entire grape industry and our entire citrus industry. The trees would have all died. You do have to have parts of the system that are low cost and efficient in an economic sense, so you can afford to switch them off. If you don't have that, we wouldn't have a sustainable irrigation system. Unfortunately, we have a variable climate, and rice is perfect for that. You don't have to decide whether or not to plant rice until mid-November, after you know how much water's there. That's why through most of the last decade, no rice was grown in Australia. It kept our irrigation industry alive.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark. Do you have any more? Yes, Phil.
I'd be interested to hear your comments on the levy that's proposed on dam farmers. When I was a boy, I remember I used to swim in the Rocky River in mid-north. I don't think it knows what water is to this day. There's been numerous dams built. This is right out in the country. So I'd just be interested in your view on that levying those dams, because I've got a lot of family and friends who are pretty anti.
Everybody always wants access to as much water as they'd like to have. The reality is there's only so much water in the system, and particularly in the Adelaide Hills. Every time somebody puts another dam in, then another part of the system gets less water. And there has to be a limit on that. We just can't sustain the ongoing development of more and more dams. The wicked part of it is work out how to bring controls in to do that, and that's very difficult. And in places like the Mount Lofty Range and everywhere else, they are doing that. The question which you ask is then really is how do you fund that activity, and should dam owners pay for the regulation of the system, and which includes protection of their dam getting water so that nobody higher up can put a dam in that takes their water so their dam's empty. The question is, should you make dam owners pay for that, or should you fund it out of taxpayers' revenue? My inclination is it's better to have local control and local management of that, with the levy going into that natural resource management boards locally running that system. But if it came out of consolidated revenue, you could achieve it that way as well. What is important is that actually development is controlled, and one of the tragedies in the Murray-Darling, in fact, is that thousands and thousands of dams have been put in right around the top of the really wet part of the basin, where hobby farmers and people in rural retreats go because it's a nice environment to live. First thing they do is they put in a dam, normally before they put in a house. Each one of them is the highest of high security water because it captures all the water that comes in and it evaporates. And if there's 10,000 of those, that's 10,000 each, about 5 gigalitres, that's 50,000, megalitres, that's actually 50,000 megalitres of water taken from South Australia.
Just one quick question.
I'd be interested to know your comments in relation to the connectivity to the Great Artesian Basin and the Murray-Darling Basin, and the 45 megalitres that are going to be taken out each day that's just gone through in relation to the mining and the big dam.
Firstly, the Great Artesian Basin and the Murray-Darling Basin surface water and groundwater systems, as far as I'm aware, are still thought to be unconnected. But we might be wrong, you could be surprised. The expectation and the thought is that they're separate systems. So that's the first comment. Second comment relates to developing the mining industry. One of the things the mining industry's been doing is going in and buying up quite a few pastoral leases that use groundwater, and they'll be switching off the groundwater used by the pastoral leases to enable the mining. I think that in terms of the economic benefits makes sense. There's some acid tests, like you'd expect the mountain springs to keep on flowing and being healthy, and getting all that right. In terms of the overall development, I'm not overly concerned about the Olympic Dam. What I'm more concerned about is what happens to Spencer's Gulf as a whole. There are 32 mining developments that are going ahead at the moment and being assessed very quickly that are going to be served out of the Iron Triangle. Olympic Dam is one of them, and I've been working with the mining industry and trying to convince them that we need to get the science right to understand how Spencer Gulf works, because it's a reverse estuary. It doesn't have rivers flowing into it. All the contaminants and everything flow up the top and evaporate, so it's more saline at the top than the bottom. Most gulfs are the other way around because rivers flush them out. We could make an awful mistake in Spencer Gulf, and BHP Billiton and I have been talking about this, and they're really worried that they won't do everything right, that somebody else or the next 10 developments that come along after them could make a mess and they'll be blamed for it. So there's a need to think about where the Gulf's management is going over the next 50 years and get that right.
Thank you, Mike. We haven't got any time.